The public servants that I inherited, certainly the senior ones, came from Social Security and the Commonwealth Employment Service and other places, and they were deeply entrenched in their brains with the law. That's what I mean by in the olden days, people actually knew the law and they understood the law, and they were trained in it. And it's just something that sort of disappeared, I think, somewhere down the. And so the lawyers became the only experts. And my view is that law doesn't belong to the lawyers. They are not the only interpreters or understanders of the law.
Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. My name is Caroline Cruz-Barlow, and joining me today on Kaurna land is recovering public servant, now of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Caroline.
And very excitingly, our special guest, inaugural Centrelink CEO, Vardon AO.
Hello, how are you?
I am very good, thank you. So look, late last year we talked about a range of things around the establishment of Centrelink and what had changed between now and then. And in that episode, you touched a little bit on some of the things that you noticed in the Royal Commission and the report about the role and influence of lawyers. You seem to have strong views. Danielle seems to have strong views. So I thought, this would be a nice topic for us to all come back together and discuss. So let's start. When we last met, Sue, you said, and what happened, I saw, was lots of people had taken away their capacity because subsequently lawyers had to answer everything. Do you want to expand a little bit on what you meant when you talked about that?
I'd like to start off by saying that I'm very grateful for lawyers in my life. As a chief executive of many government departments, there have been times when I have been represented in courts where I've dealt with judges and fantastic people who have made wonderful decisions that I've really liked. So this is not about lawyers. Mm-hmm. This is a conversation about how is it that the senior public service have allowed the incursion of lawyers into what I think is into a decision-making set that they should actually know a lot more about without relying on seeking opinions. And I think, why is that so? Is it because of risk? Nobody wants to be on the front page of any newspaper. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to let their ministers down, making sure that they do everything legally and so on. But there was a time, and I would wish that it would come back, where senior public servants actually understood administrative law. Mm-hmm. They read the legislation that they were responsible for, that they carried the knowledge of that legislation around in their heads as they saw decisions that required to be made. And only on very rare occasions did they have to go and seek an opinion. It was administrative law, particularly, was part of their training and their learning, and it seems to me that it's kind of slowly disappeared, although there are the odd course law for non-lawyers. But I look at the senior public service now and I think they're scared, and they have allowed what they should be to be lesser now than they could be.
Scared, Sue? Well, I'm going to offer a little bit of challenge, because as you were talking, I'm remembering some of the witnesses. Yep. And my take on some of the witnesses who said things like, it wasn't for me to read the legislation, I was relying on the advice that I was provided. Less scared, more interested in the opportunities available from not knowing the full limits of the legislation.
Well, you could call it anything, really. Neglect, scared, fearful, incompetent, any of those words, because there is no one senior public servant. They all come in from different angles. I suppose it's my take on the public service as it has become, and it's risk averse.
Yeah.
And I think part of that risk averse is political, and part of that risk averse is that we don't want to be on the front page of the paper, so we have to be very careful what we do. I want to give I think I did refer to this example, but I thought it was the best example I could find about incursion and service delivery. So I went to set up Centrelink, and I'm repeating a story. When I set up Centrelink, a lawyer said to me, a very senior lawyer said to me, you can only give the people an answer to the question that they ask. So if they come in and say, I want a pension, you can say eligible or not eligible. You must not give them options because you might miss out an option and they might then sue the government for missing out an option. Mm-hmm. Now, that was the whole way the social security system had been implemented. It was anathema to the government, to me, to everybody, that this should be the future.
Yeah.
And I use that example again because it's the protect versus open up, expand, improve service, and all of those things that come. And it just was a little tiny, but I think powerful example of, thank you, lawyer. I've heard the advice. I've taken it, but I'm now going to go ahead and do a whole lot of other things. Not, oh, thank you, lawyer, I'm now going to stop thinking.
It's about engagement with risk, isn't it? Because it's, sometimes, and we've talked a little bit about this in the pod, sometimes when you get legal advice, you say, I hear your advice and I'm willing to take the risk, that someone will come back and challenge me and say, you didn't give me all the 6 options. And you think, yep, on balance, I'm happy to have taken that risk. But other times you don't want to take that risk because it's not appropriate to risk something more integral, say. And I think that question, as you were talking, I did get that real sense in my stomach of like, oh yeah, sometimes when a lawyer says don't do something, you do feel it in your body. It's a kind of physical fear.
Look, absolutely. I think the other thing that you're describing though, Sue, is everything we do comes with risk, and lots of government decisions have never been challenged and could be challenged, and a lawyer is incredibly right to tell you that might happen. Is it likely to happen? Would it be the end of the world? And if you operate like that, you're also not engaging at all. So if you can only answer the direct question and you stand there knowing that they might be eligible for another government service, so it's a balance between other disciplines. So one discipline is the best legal advice would be don't say absolutely anything you don't have to because you're representing a government and there might be risk to anything that you say. A customer service, a social work, a whole bunch of other disciplines would say if you are standing there with advice that might send them on a journey down to the right place, then the correct thing to do is to provide your best advice at the time. And so it is about risk, but it's also about not operating with legal advice that constantly keeps you at the no or completely low risk and asking for a risk assessment in that advice. So you suggest that we shouldn't refer people on or give any more information than's required. What is all the risk to that? What's the likelihood of it? Like, the legal advice doesn't usually come with a risk matrix like that.
No. But I have always said, and I've said it a kind of constant, it's part of my mantra, the greatest risk is opportunity lost. And I think that we can take risk on one hand. Sometimes I look at risk assessments and I think, oh my goodness, we're going to die if we go ahead with anything. We should add to that risk, what are the opportunities that are going to be lost if we don't proceed? And I get very worried about people who get the risk in the wrong quadrant, so to speak. But anyway.
I went down a Sue Vardon journal articles and speeches wormhole yesterday and lost quite a bit of time on it because you have an absolutely beautiful turn of phrase. But I was particularly reading something you wrote in 1998 for the Innovation Journal, the Public Sector Innovation Journal, that was about creating a responsible service delivery agency. I think it was a part of the Canadian public sector program. It's quite weighty 20-page plus article where you lay out the whole vision for Centrelink, the staff, the culture, the systems, the ICT, the processes. it's an end-to-end vision for what it should be and do, and it's kind of an operating model. And I got to the end, and it was very much a page-turner, so I realised there was one word I hadn't seen. So I thought, I'm a bit of a speed reader. I should double-check my own facts here. So I used the search function in the PDF, and I searched for lawyer, legal, law, 0, 0, 0. I could find no reference in this kind of manifesto article to the role and function of a legal unit, lawyers, legal skills. So what was your idea for the role and functions of lawyers of Centrelink when it was set up?
Well, we didn't have them.
A world without lawyers.
Without lawyers. And it comes back to an arrangement that I made with the head of Social Security at the time. And we were implementing the Social Security Act. We were also implementing lots of other acts. But he said very clearly, I'm in charge of the law, you're in charge of implementation. And so at that time, to have brought in lawyers would have been seen as to challenge the law. And my criticism of the robo-debt thing was that the lawyers in the operational department started to argue with the lawyers in the policy department. And it is the policy departments who own the legislation. Well, from their minister, of course. It comes down from their minister. And so it wasn't my role then to have people interpreting things. But I did need lawyers. We had to have contracts, and so we would get lawyers from the AGS or from time to time the private sector. But being legal underpinned everything we did. That whole manifesto was lawful. And so it was a bit like accounting was underneath it, HR was underneath it, all of those things were underneath. This was the top of the iceberg, the vision where we were headed was top of the iceberg. But underneath it all were all of those other things that make sure you do a proper job.
But and it wasn't a focus of concern that you needed to have. They weren't in the chain of command. Not that I'm suggesting they should have been, but it wasn't like it was, if we're reviewing a decision of ourselves, it'll go off to the legal unit, or like none of that seemed to. It was like we will use, this is how it read to me, we will use our best judgment as experts in the Act, in the implementation and regulatory interpretation of it, to provide the very best efficient compliant service we can. It didn't have a feeling like there was a second guessing of oneself and then if we're not quite sure, we'll send it all off to legal. That didn't seem to be built into the structure.
Wasn't necessary.
Because the public servants could do it.
The public servants that I inherited, certainly the senior ones, came from Social Security and the Commonwealth Employment Service and other places, and they were deeply entrenched in their brains with the law. That's what I mean by in the olden days, people actually knew the law and they understood the law and they were trained in it, and it's just something that sort of disappeared, I think, somewhere down and so the lawyers became the only experts. And my view is that law doesn't belong to the lawyers. They are not the only interpreters or understanders of the law. I've been responsible for many pieces of legislation and I've always understood what they meant, what they said. Part of my contract was to read the Social Security Act, which I'd have to tell you, hundreds of pages so I basically knew not the individual bits of it, but I certainly knew the import of it. And it's just, there is a point at which a senior public servant should know what's right and wrong, what's legal, what's not legal, and so on. And it doesn't belong just to lawyers.
I think that's a reasonably critical point there. So have either of you ever had that experience of having particularly in a very regulatory part of government, someone who's worked in the same act that might not have had many amendments or any for decades and decades, and for some reason you do need Crown or someone around, and someone who's flicked through the act perhaps briefly in their career comes and tries to talk to someone who's done nothing for 20 years but interpret possibly only a single clause or a single section, and watch them with no formal legal training, and they're not a lawyer, but they have operated in this one section for most of their career. I can think of a number of times that I've been in this situation, particularly as we got more risk averse and we wanted to check potentially risky decisions with Crown, and watching kind of experienced regulators kind of eat up these poor Crown lawyers who had, before the meeting, read the section and thought, oh, well, that usually means this, this and that. And then you've got this really experienced non-lawyer who's like, well, nope, when we went to the tribunal, it meant this, and then it was interpreted in this way. And then Joe Bloggs, the commissioner and the registrar of this, interpreted it in this way. And just kind of watching poor lawyers kind of melt in a puddle of, well, I was reading the piece of paper, I wasn't doing the living and breathing of the execution of it, and law is made over time. It's not what's written on...
Not just
what's written on the paper. And so I think that what you're talking about, the law not just belonging to lawyers, is that there are some people in government who are incredibly across and competent and capable of their part of it.
And I think that's what we found with a lot of people who came into Centrelink.
Yeah.
So do you think, Sue, that, I mean, you covered this a little bit before, do you think people are losing confidence? Like, do you think senior decision makers are losing confidence? Do you think people are losing confidence in senior decision makers, and that's why the legals? Like, where do you think the pressure, where do you think the kind of risk aversion comes from?
Look, I can't speak for everybody, because I can think of brilliant chief executives in South Australia who are trying to do their very best. But I've been watching a television show recently called Nemesis and thinking, what would it be like? I know what happened to the public service underneath all of that. Would you be putting your hand up? Would you be wanting to be noticed in that kind of environment? And I thought, that's the political world that those Canberra bureaucrats had to negotiate. Who is your minister in? Is your minister out? There's a whole lot of very complicated things, and I can understand in that environment there is a reluctance. But there was also a rise of the people who could feed into that language. And that was quite interesting to me to watch who became powerful in that space. And they changed their language. And I can talk about it another time, because actually language is really important. But we won't talk about it today. But they could take their words and they could, yes, we're going to be, you want to be the cop on the beat? Well, we'll be the cop. We'll make you be the beat. Or you want to stop all those refugees, or you want to stop all the... We'll make sure that no boats. We'll shoot down any boat, or whatever they do with those boats.
Direct and not nuanced language.
No, that's right. They didn't want nuanced language. And the public service is essentially nuanced, because you have to be able to get lots of facts very quickly, and you have to be able to, complicate it with wicked problems, and it's not subtle, it is subtle, it is subtle in so many ways. So you ask, what are the factors? Politics is definitely a factor, a fear. And then, of course, media, though I think politics has always been around, but I don't think we've seen politics in the past quite like we've seen politics more recently. So media is an issue, politics is an issue. Not so much appeal and all of those other things. I think the rest of the system sort of chugs on.
Yeah, less of a concern about a challenge of a decision and much more of a concern about a statement that something might be unlawful, that you need to be able to say it's been legal. That's quite an interesting observation.
And that really rings true, because a decision being challenged is an uncomfortable feeling, but there's a process for it.
Yes.
I think I'm always reminding people about where there is a process. You need to use it to help with your anxiety about. So same with kind of big organisational change. There's a process for that. Name your functions, go through the strategic part, and then get to your organisational design. And it's the same with a review of a decision or a complaint. There's a process for that. Yeah. Going through those processes, once you've done them once, you understand how they work and you're more confident in them. there's also a pattern to it. There is no pattern to politics or media. If you find yourself in that range, you're right. So it's a very scary feeling to have. And finding yourself in the firing line, I think, of counsel assisting during the Royal Commission was also somewhere where you didn't want to be. And they both, I think, quite famously would begin questioning anyone with a law degree with this kind of incredibly forensic questioning. So this was anyone who had a law degree. Wasn't necessarily people who were lawyers or admitted to practice or who had done their PLT, but he would ask them what university they attended, who they studied under, who they did con law under. And it was a really great concern to the Royal Commission how lawyers conducted themselves, and how they missed that the scheme was incompatible with the legislation, and that, unlawful. So in the last episode we talked about skills. So it's tough gig being a lawyer in government. And we've talked about how hard it is to be trained in a particular discipline and then have to grow your lenses that you apply as a senior leader. Actions always need to be lawful. But beyond that, when you're a senior leader, you're looking at the economic, the systemic, the sustainability, the social cohesion. You're looking at lots of lenses when you're looking at decision making. Do you think the kind of proliferation of people with a legal background but not necessarily lawyers has changed how we are thinking and making policy? Because there's certainly been a huge increase in leaders who have a legal background, and it's a particular way of thinking. So, I mean, in the same way that if all the leaders had a particular training in medicine or accounting, I think that would also impact on how the leadership was making and driving policy development. Do you think that has an impact?
I'm just rattling through my brain to think of the lawyers who are now senior in government. Mm-hmm. Firstly, the universities put out too many lawyers, and there are not enough jobs for them.
So they had to become public servants.
Well, I mean, it's a well-known thing. Every university wants to have a law school. And so I think, there's 800 graduates in Adelaide for 60 jobs, or 600 graduates, 80 jobs, whatever it is. Yeah. And so, a lot of people want to do the law. They don't necessarily want to become lawyers, but it's, they want to have it as a background. And it's a fair thing to have law as a background. A lot of people add law to their first degree. Mm-hmm. One of the good social workers on the social work appeal panel has a social work degree and a law degree, and she brings that extra expert. That it's all that. It can be a great added advantage to the way you think. Has being lawyers made a big difference? I can't really comment. I think it's more about the attitudes and whether they're open-minded and can do the job that they've got, rather than that they suddenly become very conservative. Because I think again of this man in Tasmania that I know, senior public servant in Tasmania, brilliant lawyer. He brings an amazing legal skill to it, but he's got so many other talents, so many other things. A great strategic thinker, fantastic program implementer, all of those other things. So if a lawyer can develop a whole lot of other skills, they should be very good. They should be very wise, so long as they don't use it as an excuse to not do things. They have to understand when you're a senior public servant, you actually have to do things. You can't. You have to implement policy. You have to do all sorts of things. You have to make things happen.
I love this so much because you're reminding me of a CFO I once worked with who said to me, "Look, Caroline, I know the way that we can make the budget balance the best, and that's that we could just stop doing things." And I just thought exactly the same way. That's how you can manage legal risk. You can just stop doing.
Stop spending, stop doing, and then nothing will go wrong.
Yep, that's right. So any final reflections, ladies, on the interface, and I love that language, the incursion of lawyers into the policy process or policy space? Anything left unsaid?
I want to finish by saying it's very useful to have a lawyer in the room. Yeah. I don't want to indicate in any way that I am disrespectful for lawyers. I think a sensible person has a lawyer in the room to make sure that things are appropriately underpinned. A lawyer is one voice amongst many, but not the dominant voice. Unless something is unlawful, of course, then you want them to be the dominant voice. But the legal information and the responsibility of the public sector to the law that they implement, to all the legislation, is well protected by having somebody in the room who understands it. They've got to be able to understand their own legislation. Not every lawyer does understand their own legislation, but they can learn it. Because, I mean, any degree has its limitations. You don't learn everything. Like social workers didn't learn anything about child protection. So they have to speed up on why they're there and what they're doing. But they are important. They are an important voice in any conversation.
No, I want to thank Sue for joining us yet again, and a shout out to our very many excellent lawyers that we have all worked with for their patience with our episode today. And I reflect that I think what Sue was talking about in relation to knowing what the right mix of advice needs to be when you're making a decision, and making sure that the right volumes are up on the right disciplines.
Beautiful. Great note to finish on. Till next time. Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. Those of us in the employ of the state government speak in a strictly personal capacity, consistent with the Public Sector Code of Ethics that permits public servants to promote an outcome in relation to an issue of public interest, in this case, the betterment of the public service. Nothing we say should be taken as representing the views of the government or our employers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.